2014 meeting of the Agency Operations Committee. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being broadcast via the internet, so prepare accordingly. Before we get into the agenda, I would like to welcome two of our new board members to the committee, Mr. John Steen, who unfortunately is ill and unable to be here today, and Ambassador Sada Coomer. Welcome. They've recently joined the board and have appointed by Chairman Hahn to the Committee on Agency Operations. We're glad to have you as members of the board. And would you like to make any comments?
Well, thank you for inviting me. This has been a unusually interesting appointment. I have been spending a lot of time in reading, learning, and hopefully applying some of the learnings that I made. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to have you. Although not new, Dr. Dennis Golan is also serving on the Committee on Agency Operations for the first time. Dennis, welcome to the AOC. I'd also announce that Dennis has been appointed to Vice Chair by Chairman Hahn, and we look forward to your contributions on the committee as well. First action item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 22nd, 2014 Agency Operations Committee meeting. The minutes were sent to all members on April 9th, 2014. Do I have any questions or corrections to the minutes? Have a motion? Second. Have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. For the next agenda item, we actually have three updates that will be presented. These updates are informational only and do not require any committee action. Agenda item 3A is a standing report that we receive every quarter, which is an update on the agency finances. This report was sent to all board members 2 weeks ago. Dr. Alonzo will present this report, and then he and his staff will be available to answer questions afterwards. Dr. Alonzo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. We have three reports, as you have noted. The standing quarterly financial report. We have a report on the implementation of the CRAFT reporting system, and then an update on the loan program. All three reports, as you have noted, are only for information and do not require any board action. I will present the financial report, call on staff to present the CRAFT implementation, and then we'll conclude by my presentation of the update on the loan program. The first report, as mentioned, is the quarterly financial report that we provide to this committee every quarter. As you have noticed, electronic copies of the report were mailed to you on April 9th for your advanced review. You will also, I believe, we have put a hard copy here at your places in case you need to take a look at that now. This financial report is a format that we have developed over the years. We've had this one here in place for, I'd say, at least 3 or 4 years. Of course, as always, I ask that if any board member wants any new information or presented differently or in another way, we certainly are open to making that report something that is useful to you. I just want to reiterate that this report is what I use to manage and track our finances. I receive this report monthly, and I meet with staff, we discuss it, and we go over the balances and so forth. The report that is here before you today covers the first 7 months of the current fiscal year. I did not find any extraordinary items that need to be explained that stand out to me. I can tell you that we are on track to expand the funds in accordance with the approved budget. You may notice that there are several programs when you look at the list of trusted programs that have a sizable amount of funds yet to be spent, even with 7 months of the fiscal year gone. This is due to the fact that in the first year of the biennium, most programs, if not all of them, have what they call UB or carryover authority and will be available to be spent in fiscal year 2015. So the first year of the biennium, we really we manage the budgets, of course, but we don't get too concerned if towards the end of the year we still have unspent funds, because we know that we can carry them over to the next year. Also, while I am talking about financials and financial report, I would like to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, if I may, to introduce to the committee and to the board our interim assistant commissioner for financial services, who is here with us today, Mr. Ken Martin. He was appointed at the beginning of the month and is serving with me on looking at the agency financials. Thank you, Ken. Mr. Chairman, I would be glad to respond to any questions or have staff respond to any questions that you may have on the financial report.
Thank you, Dr. Alonso. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 3B, an update on continuous improvement, which will include a report on craft implementation and a report on loan origination fee structures. Linda Battles and Sid Hodgson will present the first update, and I'll call on Linda and Sid to present now.
Good afternoon. The CRAFT system, which stands for Customer Relationship and Feedback Tracking System, is a web-based application that allows agency staff to efficiently record customer interactions and student complaints and subsequent responses and actions, manage response target dates, and store pertinent information. There are several state and federal regulations that warrant the CRAFT system as a critical tool for the agency's ability to comply with these regulations and to provide timely, accurate, efficient, and high-quality information to our customers. For example, the Texas Government Code requires state agencies to accurately report the number and nature of requests for information made by the public. It also requires state agencies to gather information and evaluations from the public about the quality of an agency's customer service and to report that information back to the governor's office and the Legislative Budget Board every 2 years as part of our agency's strategic plan. Every state agency must also have a compact with Texans, which outlines the agency's procedures for responding to public contacts and complaints and provides average customer waiting times for responses. And finally, recent program integrity regulations issued by the U.S. Department of Education require the agency to establish a process to review and appropriately act on student complaints concerning our institutions of higher education here in Texas, and requires the agency to keep track of those student complaints and agency responses. Therefore, given all of those state and federal regulations, it's very important to have a system like the CRAFT system. The agency, for at least the last 14 years that I've been here at the coordinating board, has relied on an antiquated and non-user-friendly system known as the TRAC system to obtain online requests for information and complaints and to track responses. The functionality of the TRAC system is simply too limited, and it makes it challenging to compile the needed data to report on the agency's biannual customer service report. There's just no effective way to run reports to review the type, nature, and frequency of inquiries from the general public, or to review the quality of staff responses and the efficiencies and time response involved. So I was extremely pleased when Sid Hodgson informed me about 3 years ago about the CRAFT system. And prior to joining the coordinating board, Sid served as a consultant with the Texas Department of Transportation, which actually had implemented the CRAFT system for their agency for the same purpose. TxDOT had acquired the software at no cost from the state of Florida, and fortunately, Sid was able to get that same software over at the coordinating board at no cost. So again, the CRAFT system will provide the agency with the capability to track and report inquiries and complaints and be compliant with these state and federal regulations. I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Sid to talk more about the functionality of the system and the timeline for rolling the system out agency-wide.
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, everybody. As Linda's already mentioned, CRAFT is a web-based application, and what it will provide the agency with is a centralized database of all interactions we have with the external parties, members of the legislature, students, parents, the media, general public. And the way the application works is that records can come in from a variety of sources. They may come in via email. They may come in over our Contact Us on the main website, letters, phone calls, personal interactions. Any of those would be recorded in the system. And when the issue is recorded in the system will automatically generate a due date based on the type of issue involved, the source of the issue, and the priority. For example, an issue coming from the governor's office or from a legislator will have a standard of 2 days to respond, 5 days to resolve the issue. A member of the public, it would be 5 days to respond and 10 days to resolve the issue. And those parameters can be modified over time as we gain more experience with the application. The system itself is based on a workflow capability, so a person who is assigned responsibility for a particular issue can then delegate various tasks or activities related to dealing with that issue to members of their staff or others, and assign due dates for each of those activities, and then the person can work on their particular task, submit attachments or any documentation supporting the resolution of the issue, and also report the completion of their activity. The system will also allow contacts to be recorded over the course of resolving an issue. For example, if somebody in the course of resolving an issue requires a phone call to an external party or an email, those contacts can also be recorded in the system. So over time, you'll have a complete history of everything that's happened related to that issue and all the activities involved. The system also provides standard reports that will track our performance metrics, our ability to meet those target dates I mentioned earlier, and also a strong querying capability, so you can submit queries based on type of issue, the person submitting the issue, the customer, and so on. In terms of the current status, the Commissioner's Office, External Relations, and General Counsel went live in February of this year, and at the present time we are training the loan program staff. There's around 60 individuals being trained in that area, and ultimately they'll be the largest group of users of the system because the loan program staff over the course of a year deal with literally thousands of queries from students, from their parents regarding status of their loans. The Workforce, Academic Affairs, and Research Division is currently planning for the implementation in that division, so we are working with them to define the workflows in that area. As you can imagine, each area has their own unique ways of handling these things. So once we complete that area, we'll then proceed with other divisions one at a time, defining the workflows in that area and proceeding with implementation. Just some stats. Since we went live in February, there have been 98 issues that have been received. 83 of those have now been resolved. 15 are in progress. And in terms of the source of those issues, 23 were student complaints, 22 from the media, 9 from the legislature, and the balance from a variety of public, parents, and businesses. So that's where we are right now, and we certainly look forward to getting this implemented throughout the agency so we'll get a better handle on how well we're doing in responding to the public and to our stakeholders. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about the system.
Thank you. Bobby?
So how long had this been utilized by TxDOT before, you know, the track record and the history of it? Just curious.
It was implemented in TxDOT in 2010, so they've been using it since then. And last I heard, they had over 1,000 users of the system at TxDOT. And obviously, they deal with a larger volume of complaints than we do, fortunately.
So it's web-based, so just so I kind of have it conceptually in my head. So how does it interface with our website? Do you go to our site and then access it via that to launch it? Or?
Well, it's transparent to members of the public. They would simply enter something on the Contact Us link on our main webpage, and that'll populate our database in the CRAS system.
Thanks.
Harold?
We also use it, by the way, for incoming phone calls. If we get phone calls or direct emails, we'll use it to track those as well. Faxes, any other means in which we are contacted for information.
Sounds like something I could use over at ABC is what I'm thinking.
No free pitches.
Not that I ever have any complaints,
Right.
but
Mr.
The
Chairman.
nice thing about it, the price was right.
Harold.
So procedurally, this is web-based, and you can contact us on the web. That's pretty easy to hit the system. But would the first thing, if you get a letter or a phone call or whatever, that is logged in to the system? So as to how good the system is going to be, is the integrity of it will be determined by whether you get good information. And how are we doing that to make sure that occurs?
I don't know if you want to address that, Linda. Each area will be different.
Sure.
Yes, so each area is determining how they're going to use the system and in what appropriate way for them to use the system. But this is why I think buy-in has been so important to ensure that everybody is using it to the maximum to maximize the system. So we are really encouraging this in the divisions that we've already started. I think there's already heavy usage of it. So we're hoping once it gets agency-wide, employees will understand that this is a critical tool that we can not only keep track for external purposes and reporting and so forth, but management can also use it to see who's spending most of the time responding to inquiries and on top of everything else that they're doing and so forth. So it will help us to also deploy resources where they're needed. If we see that one area of the agency is getting inundated with certain requests for information and it's taking a lot of staff time to respond to those requests, we'll be able to tell. So you're exactly right. The system's only as good as the users use it and input that information. So
I might mention if a letter comes in, for example, that letter would then be scanned and attached to the record in the system. So the scanned image would be part of that record,
right,
for historical purposes.
And I would assume that if we have this system and there are concerns, questions, complaints, whatever, that are falling through the cracks, those are going to come to the top anyway, if they're not addressed.
I think that's one of the big benefits, because I know Dr. Alonso, for example, I've sat in meetings with him where he wants to know, well, whatever happened to that letter that was received? Have we dealt with that? Well, now we'll be able to track that. The system will automatically track it based on the due date. So we'll know if something's being missed or falling through the cracks. The other thing TxDOT found as a big benefit was, in their case, they had a lot of chronic complainers across the state. So the system will automatically, when a new issue comes in, check if that customer, if you like, is already in the database. So they don't have to re-enter all that. It's already in there. And they can track how many complaints are originating from the same source or on the same subject. So.
This will also help us identify those complaints that are high-profile issues that perhaps the commissioner needs to be notified about or the board needs to be notified about. So this will help us monitor what's coming in and what's going out.
Pastor, do you have a comment?
So how long has the state of Florida used it, and do we have any measurement tools which are built in so we can see what is the success rate of what we are trying to do?
Florida, I'm trying to recall now, Florida had been using it for a number of years, and they'd done a number of enhancements to the system over that time. I think off the top of my head it was probably like the 90s, sometime in the 90s that they implemented it in TxDOT, or Florida DOT, and then TxDOT got it from Florida DOT, did their own customizations and enhancements and made modifications. And like I say, TxDOT's been using it since 2010, so around 4 years now. The system, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of standard reports that will produce metrics. For example, how well you're doing meeting those targets based on the type of issue or the source of the issue. For example, something from the governor's office, you can see we've received so many issues, this many met their performance criteria of 5-day turnaround and so on, how many missed those criteria and so on. So there are standard reports like that.
Very nice. Thank you.
Any other questions for Linda or Sid? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Second report will be presented by Dr. Alonso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start on this report on the loan program, I want to also introduce our other interim assistant commissioner, for state financial aid programs, Lisa Muller, who is also here in the audience with us. Lisa is a long-term employee of the agency, and she has graciously stepped in to help me with duties on an interim basis. I thank both of them for that. I normally do not use PowerPoint slides, but in this presentation, there are a couple of graphs and charts that I think are better presented visually, so I'm going to walk you through a short presentation on the PowerPoint. This is a briefing on an initiative that we have been working on for some time now. We briefed the board chair and vice chair about 2 weeks ago during our regularly scheduled phone call, and Mr. Hahn requested that this committee receive a similar briefing on this initiative. About 2 years ago, I don't recall exactly when, there was a presentation to the AOC on the loan program, and some of the board members asked us to look at the loan program and see what we could do to make the loans more accessible, more affordable to the students. Of course, keeping in mind that we have to do that in a responsible way because of our responsibilities to the bondholders. And so we've been working on this and have come up with what we call a 0.35% origination fee structure for our loans. I had asked the staff to make sure that we could implement something like this without jeopardizing the integrity of our program. So on the first chart there, you will see a comparison of how we previously, or how we have handled the origination fees up to this point, and then on the right-hand side, how we are going to handle them starting with the Linden season that's coming up, for the fall semester. Previously, we used a Vantage score of over 700 to qualify borrowers and their co-signers. If a borrower or the co-signer was approved, in other words, had a Vantage score of over 700, they would be charged a 5% origination fee. If the borrower and the co-signer were both approved, in other words, had that 700 Vantage score, they would receive a 3% origination fee to their on their loans. So what we are changing is the credit requirements, the credit score requirements, and we are lowering those just a bit, but we are putting them in 3 tiers, what we call tier A, B, and C. As you can see on there, tier A is borrowers or co-signers with a Vantage score of over 711 who will get 0% origination fee. Borrowers who fall in the B category of scores between 651 and 710 will receive a 3% origination fee, and those that are between 591 and 650 that we're calling the C tier will continue to receive the 5% origination fee. Of course, if you have under 590 or 590 or below, you do not qualify for one of our loans. So that's the tiers that we are proposing to go to. What led to this? There are several factors. One is in 2009, I don't recall if any of you were on the board. I don't think you were. This board accepted our recommendations to enter into a contract with the Office of the Attorney General to collect on our defaulted loans. It was, Dennis, I think you were on the board at that time. I think it was one of the best moves that we have made in a long time relative to this loan program, because it has really increased our average monthly collections, and I have a chart here that I will go through in just a second. Another factor that led us to be able to go to this tiered origination fee structure is a reduction of our default rate. And again, I have a chart that I will get to here in a little bit. This reduced default rate is due to better credit underwriting and default avoidance, aggressive default avoidance on our part. And also, even though we can't take any credit for that, the economy has been pretty strong the last few years, and that obviously has helped reduce that default rate. The third factor is that our fund balance equity, again, I will get to that chart in a second here, as shown by our cash flows that we have First Southwest, our financial advisors run for us, have been increasing and show that they are holding steady and, in fact, increasing every year. Excess INS funds, interest and sinking funds, have been available to us for the last few years. I will give you those specifics in a minute. And we have been able to return those to loan funds where they can be recycled into more additional loans for students. And that is a good thing, not only because it makes more loans available to students, but it produces more origination fees, more interest, and so forth. And so it perpetuates the good things that are happening in the program. On this next slide is the collection fees, the monthly collections that I alluded to a minute ago. As you can see, from 2009, when we entered into this contract with the Attorney General, the first year we had an average monthly collection of $290,000. This year, FY14, year to date, we are on track to exceed a $7 million collection and maybe even more, because now the monthly collections are almost to or right above $659,000. This has been, like I said, a good contract for us. It's been modified a couple of times since we first entered into this contract, but the results, I think, are telling and obviously very positive. On this next slide,
excuse me, Arturo, yes. Did you say 7 million or 700,000?
659,000 a month.
Per month?
Per month. Okay. Yes. So on track to collect over 7 million in the FY. The default rate that I again alluded to a second ago, in the last 4 or 5 years, since December 1 of 2009, has gone from about at 8.5%. I know that chart is hard to read, but currently to 3.86%. Again, we can thank the Texas economy, because that sure contributes to this. The underwriting requirements that I mentioned a while ago that we have strengthened. The contract with the Attorney General's office certainly has contributed to this loan default rate going down. And I say this not to brag on myself, but really to recognize the hard work of staff over the last 7 years. This has been a well-managed program, and I think that all of these factors that I'm showing you today bear that out, that we have really managed this program to the best of our ability. The next slide has the cash flows that project our portfolio equity, and as I said, it has been increasing. When we ran it in 2008, the financial advisors projected a 372 equity. As of the last runs that we did in January, February of this year, that equity is now projected to be at almost $548 million. I want to make sure that I stress that this is not $548 million sitting in the bank. It is a balance sheet figure. In other words, if we were to stop making loans, stop selling bonds, continue collecting, make all our interest payments, make all our principal payments, eventually, when all is said and done, we would have a net equity or a surplus equity. There are several ways of terming this, of over $547 million. So again, this is a good thing, and it gives us the comfort to be able to restructure the origination fee. The last slide that you have before you is showing how much we have transferred back from the interest and sinking fund account to the loan fund. Our bond covenants require us to have at least next year's payments or next year's requirements on hand, and anything over that, and of course we also have to take out the amount that is needed for the operations, but anything above the operations cost and above what is required to have on hand by the bond covenants to meet our debt requirements, we can sink back into the loan fund. And so you can see there, it varies because some loan funds, some bond issues have a spike in the payments that we have to make. But this year, we have already transferred over $27 million back into the loan fund for additional loans. We project that in FY15, we will transfer $11 million. That $11 million that we project is net of approximately $3.9 to $4.5 million that we estimate will cost us, if you will, or opportunity cost, foregone cost of the tier origination fees. So we still will be able to return a pretty healthy amount back to the loan fund. Again, the factors that contribute to this is the high credit ratings from the credit reporting agencies for the state of Texas, the fact that we are backed by the full faith and credit of our state. We have received very competitive interest rates in the last several bonds that we have sold. And then, as I've mentioned again, to give the credit where credit is due, we have conservatively and aggressively, solidly managed the loan operations to make sure that we are able to show these types of figures. So we have consulted with, I think as late as last week, with our financial advisors, make sure that the figures are, that I understood all the figures, and we have recommended to the commissioner. The commissioner has bought off on this. This does not require board action, but it does. We wanted you to be aware of where we are going with this loan program. We think it's a good deal. We think that our estimate, or the estimate by the financial advisors, is that about 80% of our loans will qualify for that 0% origination fee this fall. So it's opening it up, the loans, the fund to the borrowers who need it to go to school. I will be glad to answer any questions or bring staff up to answer any that I cannot.
Harold.
Arturo, we may have gone over this in the conference call, but you said 80% of those applying will
qualify.
Will qualify for the 0%?
0%. Yeah.
And that's based on historical information? I mean, if we look back at other loan requests,
right? And I believe
we have that statistical information ourselves in our portfolio.
Yes, we provide all the data to the financial advisors, and they run the figures.
And it includes credit scores.
It includes credit scores and balances and everything. So, of course, there are certain assumptions that are made. Like the default rate. We assume that the default rate will either continue to get better or at least not go back up again. We assume that we will be selling bonds at favorable rates. Again, right now we don't anticipate selling bonds till maybe late this year or early next calendar year. So those assumptions are built into there, Mr. Chairman.
So just, I'm sorry, Harold.
Go ahead.
Well, just along those lines, if 80% get it at 0, what percent do get denied? Or what are you anticipating in that context?
I don't know if we have the percentage that get denied, but I believe that they estimate that the other two origination structures will have about 10% each. 10 in the 3 and 3 and 10.
Not too many get denied.
How many? Obviously.
Good.
As far as the existing bond issues, we obviously have some bond issues that are at higher rates Is there a provision in the indentures to allow us to refund those at a lower rate?
Yes, and we have been doing that. In fact, just this year, we refunded quite a bit of our funds. Another thing that I think is it's a good deal for the agency is that we were able to refund all of our variable interest rate bonds. Now, right now, having variable rate was not hurting us because interest rates have remained relatively low and, in fact, have gone down a little bit. But in the long run, I mean, there's no doubt from everything that I read from the economists that there will be an increase in interest rates. And so eventually that would start hurting us. So we have converted all variable rates to fixed interest rates.
Do you have any idea at this point, has First Southwest come with a listing of what the potentials are?
For interest rates?
Because once rates go back up, that opportunity is lost.
I had talked to Lee last week, and I asked him to look into his crystal ball, but he thinks that interest rates are going to remain steady for probably the next 3 or 4 quarters. But again, it's just a guess on his part.
But again, I guess my question is if we have higher rate bonds than the current market, and there's sufficient spread between current rates and those rates, should we not be refunding those as well?
Go ahead, Patrick.
Patrick Krishock, I'm with the board. We currently have nothing eligible for refinancing until 2017. All the bonds we sell have 10-year calls, and everything that can be refinanced has been refinanced.
Okay.
Sure. Lisa, did you have something to add?
Yes, I was simply going to say that if a borrower does not qualify for a CAL loan on the basis of credit, we simply ask him or her to find another co-signer who does qualify, who could qualify, rather than just slamming the door shut and saying you're denied.
Yes, that's why that's so low.
Yes.
Figure what?
It's up to them to figure
Most
what.
of them do.
Arturo, you were showing a minute ago the equity positions.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, there's some kind of a discounting that goes on there, and I'm assuming that's based on the default rate, so you get to a real number.
That is correct. We use the default rate of 7%.
You do, okay.
The long-term average, we showed about 6%. And the financial advisory firm, First Southwest, added 100 basis points onto that to come up with the 7%
Perfect.
default
And
rate.
that's
Just to make
reflected in this number in our equity position.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
It was just a security factor, if you will.
That's great. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. Okay, agenda item 4A is the discussion of standard number 114, auditors' communication with those charged for governance. Susan Warren, senior partner at KPMG, and Erica Solis with KPMG will present this item to the committee. Susan and Erica, welcome.
We are here to present the planning for the 2013 financial statement audit. So that's what the first presentation is about. And you have in our agenda in front of you. To plan an audit, the standards do require that we meet with the governing body and go through the items you see here on the agenda. We are supposed to discuss our client team, the objective, your responsibilities versus ours, kind of the overall approach to the audit, get into some detail about the audit plan. And then if there were any new pronouncements under number 6, we would talk about what those implications were. There are none for 13, so we won't have that conversation. And so that's the purpose of this meeting, is to kind of let you know what an audit is, what we're doing, and then at the end of it, as there has been in the past, as some of you have been through this, there are some questions I am required to ask you to get your input into the planning process. So we'll end the presentation with those questions. The first item is a client team. You can see myself as the audit partner, Susan. In the manager box, you'll see Rebecca and Erica. Rebecca started the audit. She's on maternity leave. So Erica has stepped in. Erica was a senior on this engagement before, so she has knowledge of your client and is filling in. The concurring partner, Travis Hunter, we do have a tax manager, and you kind of wonder, well, why? There are actually still technically some tax rules that government entities are supposed to follow, and so we do look at those to make sure those are all aligned. We do have a minority firm, Mendoza, and then we do use internal audit to help us with the audit. The one thing I would point out about this slide is, I know we have conversations in the past about KPMG's rotation policies of team members and things. This is a good example of that. Last year's box for the engagement quality control her name was Dee Niles. She retired from the firm, so we replaced Dee with Travis, who also does student loan entities and universities and colleges. So we're getting a fresh look from the quality perspective. And of course, with Rebecca on maternity leave, Erica doing the review, we have another fresh look there from the manager perspective. So as we rotate out our team members, you get that fresh look perspective. Even though you still have the KPMG name, you've got different team members together for the audit. The objective of the audit, this is just to kind of let you know what the audit does, and we do put an opinion on the financial statements, and those financial statements, though, are prepared by your management team with your oversight. And so to do that, we plan reasonable assurance that it's free from material misstatement. Obviously, I can't look at every single transaction that comes through here, or I would never leave. So we have to do a risk-based approach. We do sampling, so we do it from a risk perspective. It also includes a note at the bottom there that we do test accounting records, as I just mentioned. We actually do sampling. We look at bank recs. We look at student loan reconciliations. We look at your IT systems. So we are actually looking at substantive documentation behind the areas. And of course, for accounting policies and estimates, for instance, your allowance on student loans, we do get into the methodology, the default rates, a lot of things you were just talking about. We look at all of those and make sure those assumptions are reasonable based on market conditions. So that's all that goes into the actual audit. Now, your management team, this is the list of things that they do for us before we get here. They actually adopt the policies, prepare the financial statements, they put those controls in place and make sure they're working. They have to comply with all the laws, and then they have to make all that ready for us, ready to go for the audit, and of course give us unrestricted access. And so they answer our questions during the audit. And then the last bullet says that at the end of the audit, we have what we call a representation letter. You actually do get a copy of that when we come back and give you the end results. But in that representation letter, the management team is required to tell us if they're aware of any control failures that happened during the year. Even if you fixed them before I got here, you're still required to tell me they existed. If there was any fraud of a coordinating board employee, we're not talking about the colleges and communities or the students, we're talking about employees of the state. And then, of course, if there were any adjustments that had to be made to those financial statements when you were looking through it, looking for closing procedures, things like that. Those are all things that we are required to be told, and your team actually signs a letter saying they've acknowledged all that to KPMG. From an agency operations committee responsibility, obviously, is to oversee that process, to make sure the internal controls are in place, and to establish the tone at the top of the agency, which we do look into all of those and go around and talk to everybody about those as well. And then what you have hired us to do, as I've already mentioned, is to express the opinion. And then these are all the things we have to do that. We have a professional skepticism. What that means, just translate that, is that we don't do the same audit procedures every year. Okay? I mean, there are certain things I have to do every year. I look at your debt covenants, I look at your student loans, I confirm your cash. But then when it comes into other accounts, we kind of mix that up and look for different things. And the whole idea being our thresholds being different, things like that. You just don't want your to get into an idea that you always know I'm asking for everything over $50,000. Okay, so we kind of move those numbers around to keep everybody accountable. We have to follow the professional standards. We do look at internal controls as part of our process to making sure how you are managing your risk. Now, unlike an SEC audit, we do not issue an opinion on controls. That's a PCOB requirement, not a government requirement. And then we do have required communication with the Agency Operation Committee. Part of that is today, and part of that is when the audit is over. And if we were to find any issues with controls, we are actually required to put those in writing to you in a separate deliverable, which we would give you at the end of the audit. Responsibilities for other information, and you can actually jump down to the very bottom bullet first. I'll kind of do this slide in reverse order. But in your financial statements you're used to seeing, your other information is what we call MD&A, or management disclosure, and then there is a budget to actual schedule at the back behind the footnotes. And this slide is meant to tell you that there's different pieces to your financial statements. So you have MD&A, you have a balance sheet and income statement, cash flow, and then you have your footnotes and these extra schedules. The opinion on the financial statement has different paragraphs that tell you that balance sheet, income statement, cash flows, footnotes, your audit opinion is X. Usually, hopefully it's a clean opinion. And then there's other paragraphs below that that tell you what this slide is telling you, that for those other information, we are required to read that information to make sure it makes sense based on all the other test work we have done. In other words, we tick and tie the numbers from the MD&A back to the financial statements to make sure it all lines up. We actually look at the schedules at the back to make sure it ties to the trial balances that we've been testing, and we just make sure it all makes sense. So it's a different type of audit level assurance on those two pieces of your financial statements versus the other. Questions? Yes, Dennis.
I have a question. You mentioned or made a mention of employee fraud.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does our agency have any, or maybe I should direct this to Artero, do we have any insurance to cover employee embezzlement should that occur?
I don't believe we do, Dennis.
Is that something we should look into?
We can certainly look into it, but at present we don't have any policies.
I'd like to get someone to advise us as to whether or not that's something we should have.
Okay.
I don't know what's customary in terms of what governmental agencies do in the state, but if that's something that we don't have, I'd like to get maybe Bill could look way into that, legal counsel, as to whether or not that's something we should have. Thank you.
Okay. On the next slide, this is just a graphic presentation of what I've been describing as the audit process. If you start with one, we've talked about our team. We do have, different people on our team that have the skill set to serve you. We have a tailored audit approach. In other words, we know we need to look at debt, loans. We have to look at the things that are key to your business operations, your IT systems. We do a risk-based approach, depending upon estimates versus routine versus non-routine drives our statistic sampling. And then we do work with management throughout the entire year. We'll have meetings as we need to. We've got a lot of planning conversations. We meet throughout the audit. We execute our methodology. We follow professional standards to give you the deliverable. This slide here is kind of the risk assessment slide. It's those areas that I've been talking about, but the significant audit areas would be what you would expect. Student loans and related accounts, which includes interest and, of course, the income statement, receivable and income. Debt, not only just the debt balances, but the debt covenants. We actually look at those to make sure they seem to be in compliance. We look at the grant revenues and related receivables, basically your appropriations, and then we look at how those are dispersed out to the various students or schools through the financial assistance payments. I mean, those are the significant line items in your statements, and then, of course, the allowance is a significant estimate that we spend significant time on looking at. We do inquire about commitments and contingencies. That's important for accrual purposes and or footnote disclosures. If you've entered into some big contract after year end that will change your operations for the next year, that would be an example. We'd have to put that in there to let the readers know that the business it's got a different look coming. Or if you've got a lot of times it's a big lawsuit that you're in the middle of that you don't necessarily know if you're going to pay money or not pay money, that type of thing. Sometimes then that can get accrued. But those are the types of events we're looking for there. And as I mentioned on the far right, we do spend significant time looking at the IT systems. General controls is what we refer to as access, change management, backups and routines. And the application level controls are the edit checks in your system. A plus B has to equal C before it can process through, or these check marks have to be there to make sure the loan is guaranteed before it moves forward, or it's got a co-signer before it moves forward. Those types of edit checks that are built into your system, we call those application level controls, and we look at those. And that would also include allowance reports, like the loan is delinquent, is it in the right bucket on the allowance report, to make sure that we've got how old it is and how delinquent it is and how much it needs to be reserved. That's all being driven by your IT systems. And so we spend a lot of time looking at that. And the names of the systems are there: HELMS, MIP, CRS, and BMS. So those are the systems that we're auditing during the financial statement audit. Questions on this slide, because this is kind of the key takeaway slide for those significant areas in the audit.
Questions?
Okay, then I'll move on.
Moving on.
Just the overall scope, it is the financial statement audit for 13. We do follow GAAP and government auditing standards. Of course, AICPA is our professional standards. As I mentioned, if there were internal control deficiencies, we do provide you what we could refer to as a management letter at the end of the engagement. And then our SAS 114 communication is partly what we're doing today, and then the results of the audit at the end. Materiality is one of those words that means different things to different people. So we try to give you a perspective of what it means to KPMG. Materiality drives the nature, time, and extent of our audit procedures. Put that in perspective, Do we do work at interim versus final? Here we do everything at final. It's just easier, honestly. From a timing perspective or extent, those sample sizes. So if we have something that's higher risk, we're going to do more work. If we've got something that's got great controls and more routine, we'll do less work substantively, as in vouching. So that materiality drives that process. Materiality for us does start with a mathematical calculation, but then honestly KPMG has 5 mathematical calculations, so it's a very complicated matrix as to where you fall into it and where you do and how much work you have to do before you can get out. Basically, there's a certain number, if it's bigger than this, I got to do something or we can't pass go. So that's kind of where this process goes. But those numbers are meant to help us determine if something were wrong in the financial statements, would a user of those financial statements make an incorrect decision? That's ultimately what materiality means. And so we have to think about who are the users, what's important in these financial statements. That drives our significant accounts, drives where we do most of the work as a process of that. And materiality is not just a big number. For instance, usually on the debt side, we're often concerned that the number is not big enough. You know, are we understudying the debt or the accounts payable? So it's not just the big numbers that are material. Sometimes it can be a small number because we want to make sure should it be larger. And so that's part of the process as well. This is the timeline of the audit, January to April, which we're fast approaching the end of. Is a planning process. This is the last piece of the planning. The IT work has started a couple weeks ago, so we're in the middle of doing the IT work as well as some of the audit work. That goes into May and June, where we do a lot of the reporting, and then we come back usually at the July AOC meeting and present the results. Here is a slide that I promised where I get to ask some questions just to get your input. The question number 1 is, let's say during the audit we come up with something that potentially could be a control deficiency we have to put in a letter. We don't usually like to wait. Dr. Alonso don't like to wait till July meeting to tell you about it. So we like to have a process in place before that if something like that were to occur during the audit. Historically, what we have done is decided that the chair would be the first person that Dr. Alonso and I would call to have that conversation, and then decide from there how we wanted to tell the other members. I just want to confirm that that process is good for fiscal year 13 audit. Okay. Well, noted. Number 2, what we'd like to get your input on is in the decisions you've made as a committee, have you changed any of the allocations of responsibilities between management and AOC? In other words, have you given them more authority or taken some authority back, have put new controls in place to give you more control, if you will, around the operations of the entity that we would need to be aware of? No? 3, the objectives and strategies, anything that you've spent time talking about, discussing, approving to be implemented that would change basically the business, how the business is run. No? Okay. From your particular perspective, is there a particular area, financial area, whether it be a balance sheet or income statement item, that you believe warrants more attention than what we just described we're about to execute? No?
I'm a new member of this committee, so I'm learning as we go along, even though I've been around for a while. How much stuff do we put out as an agency for a bid process? I mean, I would assume like cleaning the building is a bid outsourcing, and there's a bid process and that to do that. And I just want to make sure that we're doing that in compliance with how those type of services are acquired by this agency.
Sure. We are required, Dr. Golden, to follow state procurement guidelines. There's a certain threshold that we have to advertise and post it and so forth. So everything that falls under or over that threshold is followed to the letter. The example that you gave was like on the building or the cleaning services. Actually, that is provided by the building manager as part of a turnkey lease that we executed in 2010. Okay. So, but any big purchases, yes, definitely go through the procurement process, including bidding, evaluation, awarding, and so forth.
And we would put it out for bid. Bids would be submitted to you.
Actually, they come to our, we have to have a certified purchasing manager on board. and they go through her. I actually have two in the agency, but we have one that handles all of that for me, and it goes to her to make sure that then it is evaluated fairly, completely, and so forth. And so it doesn't come to me because we want to preserve the integrity of the process.
How is that? How is the decision made in terms of awarding the bids? Is it based on the lowest bid?
Well,
we're not obligated to take the low bid.
No, the state law says that you will award to the best bid.
Yes.
And so it's not necessarily the lowest bid.
Discretion in terms of who you choose, who exercises that discretion?
The person who is buying that service or that product. And by that I mean it could be somebody up in the division that's advertising for evaluation services, for example. Or it could be Sid that's advertising for computers, or that's a bad example because we can't buy computers because we don't have any money. But if we did have the money to buy computers, that would
Don't
be
get excited, Sid.
So it goes through an evaluation process. And so to your question about the lowest bid, there are different factors. Some are weighted, some are numerically scored, some are equal weight, some are different weights. But it depends on, we go through that evaluation process, make a recommendation, and under board rule, any award over $100,000 has to be approved by the chair and vice chair of the board and the chair of the committee that particular item went to. So it's pretty rigorous.
Yeah, the policy's in place then.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
But Dennis, were you talking about accounting services? Is that with KPMG or?
Also that's just anything that we outsource in terms of even the outside auditing agency. How does that decision made? Because I know you can get bids from different agencies. And in the past, I've been on boards where we not always choose the lowest bid. We're not required to do that. But we've also changed outside auditors every 3 or 4 years just as a risk reduction in our risk. And I'm not picking on auditors. I'm just saying I want to know how all these decisions are made, and I'm getting a better understanding of that. Thank you.
And I think we had a discussion about this summer, right? And it was when we decided to go with KPMG again.
I'm okay.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, Sue.
Okay. I believe that takes us to number 5. Any communications with regulators, it could be the IRS or federal government perspective that you've had to deal with as a committee? No? 6 is the question where, like, if you have any concerns about internal controls or the possibility of fraud, again, related to a coordinating board employee that would need to be included into our audit. 7 is just a catch-all. If there's any types of board actions you've made as far as changes in laws, governance, other matters that you've spent a significant time discussing and deliberating that would, again, change the operations of the board, so that I would have to know about that from a risk perspective. Okay. And the last slide is just there for your information. If KPMG does have a lot of information about the responsibilities of audit committees if you wanted to go look at these websites for that information. That is the end of our required planning presentation. If there's any additional questions, I can answer those now.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I have one. Just for informational purposes, if something did occur, can you go back a couple of slides there? If something did happen during the audit, we would just report that to you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay.
All right.
We'll move to agenda item 4B, which is the State of Texas federal portion of the statewide single audit report for the fiscal year ending August 31st, 2013 report number 2013-032, issued on February 21st of 2014 by the State Auditor's Office. KPMG is under contract to the State Auditor's Office for this part of the A133 audit. Susan will present this item to the committee.
Yes. This is, as you just mentioned, that Mr. Keel does the statewide federal audit or the A133 audit. We do contract with him to do part of that, and one of our assigned agencies is the coordinating board. So we also come in here at a different time and do detailed compliance work on the spending of your federal funds to comply with government requirements. And the report that was mentioned is the results of that audit is issued in February. And in that are what we refer to as findings. So if we're doing our detail audit work and we find something where federal funds were not spent in accordance with requirements or there was absence of some controls over that process, we are required to write that up, and it gets presented to not only the state government but the federal government so they can understand how their federal funds are being spent and monitored in Texas. During the fiscal year 13 audit, there was one finding that was attached to the coordinating board, and that was the reference number you were mentioning, 2013-32. And this is a new finding from last year. So if you were here last year during this presentation, we had conversations about findings last year. Those have been cleared, so that's a good thing. Those are gone and over and fixed. So we have a new one this year to discuss. And this one has to do with the Education Data Center system. This is literally it is a computer system, but it's strictly for interfacing with your community colleges dealing with federal funds. So it's not one it's not like your GL or your payroll system or anything like that. It's a little system meant just for monitoring your community colleges in these federal funds. When we're looking at that system, as I mentioned, we generally look at general controls, which are access. Who can have access to that? Is it properly segregated? And we actually found that one of your developers had access to migrate changes because she knew the different passwords to different accounts. And general practice is you don't want your developers being able to put code into the system because they could actually create code and put it in. And that's just not a good practice. We did increase our sample sizes as a result of that because for us that was a control failure. The good news is we didn't find any compliance exceptions, so we didn't find any improprieties in the data that we were looking at. It was more just a control procedure that needs to be tightened up. Any questions about that?
So what was done?
I'm going to call on Sid to go into any details that you may need, Mr. Ambassador. But in our management's response, and it is included in the report that's in your agenda material, we note that we have taken steps to remediate this problem. There was about 6 things that we had to do, and I believe that all but one of those have been implemented. Is that right, Sid?
Actually, all have been implemented.
All have been implemented. Yes, that's even better.
Do you know why this developer had the 4 passwords to begin with?
Susan and I have had a lot of discussions about this. Apparently, these accounts in question were first established back in 2007 at the time that the state decided to outsource our computer operations to IBM at the time. And the application in question, EDC, is a very complex application consisting of dozens of computer programs, various jobs that have to run the batch processes overnight. Whenever a problem does occur, what would happen is Susan Brown's staff would contact 2 support people who support this application in my group. And in order to debug these applications, quite often what they have to do is start or stop particular tasks in the flow and also access console messages, computer console messages. Now, normally those types of tasks are performed by computer operators, but at the time we lost our computer operators to the state data center. To deal with that and be able to support the application, we had to grant those privileges to the support staff. Now, the problem with that from an audit perspective is because they had those permissions, it would also enable them to move new code into production, bypassing the quality assurance group. They don't, in fact, do that. There are standard procedures in place that they follow. They'll submit a ticket, and the quality assurance group will move it into production. But still, the potential is there. So that's what we had to address. So to address it, we set up a new class of account whereby they can still start and stop those tasks, but they can no longer move new code into production. The problem that's created is they can no longer see those console messages either. So it does have the potential down the road for delaying responses or resolution of problems when they occur, but it's something we had to do, obviously. So.
As long as we keep the auditors happy. Right?
Exactly.
And the committee.
Yes.
Dr. Alonso.
If I could just make one more comment on this federal audit. There are two programs in the agency that fall over the threshold. There's a certain amount of federal dollars threshold that makes the program subject to the A133 audit, the federal audit. The other one is our student loan program, our federal student loan program that KPMG has been looking at for the last few years. And I'm happy to report, and I think it's a good, happy thing to report, is that for the first time in staff informs me, a long, long time, there were no findings in the federal student loan program. So I hope that next year we can come back and not even have Susan up here, because we can tell you that there were no findings in either one of our programs.
Absolutely.
But we are very happy that the student loan program had no findings at all.
Those are the ones that were cleared. So.
Thank you, Dr. Alonso. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you both. Agenda item 4C is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee regarding the Coordinating Board's operation budget for fiscal year 2015. Dr. Alonso will present this item to the committee.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to present the FY15 operating budget to the committee for its consideration. We sent you an electronic version of this budget to all the members on March the 27th, and also have placed a hard copy here before you in case you need that. Traditionally, the operating budget is presented for approval to this committee and to the board at the July board meeting. Because our appropriations is set for the second year of the biennium, with the chair approval, we are considering next year's budget in April. We do this mainly, for two reasons. Number one is that there's no need to wait. We know what the Appropriations Act says for the allocation, the appropriations for FY15. But most importantly, and we started this about 6 years ago, by doing this on the even number years of the biennium, by bringing the operating budget to the April board meeting, it frees us up to concentrate on the LAR, the Legislative Appropriations Request, which we will be commenced working. Actually, we've already started working on it, even though we have not received the instructions yet. But we will be spending the next 2 months concentrating on the LAR and bringing that to the committee and to the board at the July board meeting. So it was just too much to try to bring both up. I mean, we've handled it before, but this way it gives us the opportunity to concentrate on the LAR. I know that this is the first budget discussion from Mr. Cumber, so I'd like to take just a second, if I can, to outline the process that we go through before I cover the highlights, excuse me, of the budget that I think are important, and I think it's important for you to understand, or at least to be reminded of the process that we follow. The process that we follow is what I call a bottoms-up, collaborative, and open process that allows the division heads or the heads of our units to participate in the budget development. They actually develop the budget at their level, and then it comes up and it gets consolidated. By doing this, I am a firm believer that the division heads and the unit managers have not only a familiarity with their budget, but they have ownership, and they are able to better manage it throughout the year. And so what we do is I send out general instructions. In this case, we send them out, I believe, in February or January. I can't recall exactly when, to the assistant commissioners and other executives to build their budgets for them to submit their first draft to the business office. A draft copy then is consolidated of what came in from the divisions and from the units, and it is presented to David Gardner, Linda Battles, and myself for review. Based on the discussion that the three of us have, We ask for adjustments, increases, decreases, or any other adjustments that we feel necessary. Sometimes it's just a matter of clarification of what they're coming in with. But if there are adjustments necessary, we send them back for them to make those at their level. The three of us, then, David, Linda, and myself, present a draft to the commissioner, and the resultant document that is before you is what comes out of that presentation to the commissioner. I think that most of the work is done at the executive officers and the business office staff level, because when we get it, it's consolidated, it's pretty well summarized, but a lot of hard work goes into it, and I really want to thank all the officers and all the staff members that had a hand in developing the budget to bring what we have before you today. The budget structure. The budget is divided into two main components, and I am going to be referring to mostly page 1 of 15 on your document, because this is what summarizes the budget for the coordinating board. The two components are operations and trustee funds. Operations are the funds that go towards the administration of the agency and the related programs that we have to administer. And the trustee funds, of course, are what are normally known as pass-through funds. These are funds that we pass on to institutions or to other entities. On the bottom right-hand side of page 1, you will note that almost 97% of our appropriations are passed through, with only about 3% retained for the agency operations. So you will see that out of the $823.5 million budget, only $27.3 is for operations, and $796 million is for trustee or pass-through. It's also worth noting that of the $755.8 million of general revenue that the agency receives, 2% of it goes towards agency operation. In other words, the general revenue that comes to us, 98% of it is used to fund the programs that are handed out to the schools and to the students. Most of that, of course, is in the form of financial aid and the other trustee programs that are allocated or appropriated to us. Some of the budget highlights that I think are important for me to quickly go through is the proposed budget for FY15. As you can see on page 1, the second column there is $824 million, 823.5, so approximately $824 million. This amount is a $12 million or a 1% increase from the current year's budget, and you can see that on the third column where we listed the increases and decreases for a net increase of $12 million, or actually it's about 1.5% increase. On the left-hand side of page 1, we compare the current year and the proposed budget, and we have accompanying footnotes there explaining those changes between FY14 and FY15. You can see that one of the biggest changes there is that in the trustee funds, we have a huge decrease in the amount of federal funds, and that's, well, both in the operations, but mostly in the trustee funds, and that's because we lost one of the federal programs that we were no longer eligible for, that we have had for some time. And so it was the College Access Challenge Grant. The state failed to meet the maintenance of effort that is required, so we were no longer eligible for that. It's about $12.5 million per year. So that shows there. The proposed budget that you have before you here funds a total of 255 full-time equivalencies. That's how we refer to people in state business. The agency's FTEs is what we call them. The agency's FTE cap is 280. However, we only budget those positions that we have funds for. So obviously we have an excess of FTEs that we don't have the resources. Even though we can go up from the 255 up to 280, we had enough resources to fund and to budget for 255. Yes.
Tara, I don't mean to interrupt, but there was a substantial increase in money allocated to Baylor College of Medicine. Is that passed through federal dollars? I just noticed that was a...
Those are not federal dollars, those are state dollars.
State dollars,
yes,
okay.
That was an
Approved
increase, yes.
Okay.
The budget includes funding for the public community colleges, and here's I think I need to make a disclosure. The community colleges is not part of our budget, but the community college funding has to come through us. There is a bill pattern, Agency 704, that allocates the money to the community colleges, but because community colleges are not considered state agencies, they cannot receive the appropriations directly, so they come to us, and then we disperse it to the community colleges. I believe we disperse it over the year. That total allocation for the community colleges is $896 million. You see that reflected there on the bottom of page 1, where it says Article 3, 704, $896 million for public community colleges. And on page 11, if you're interested, we have a breakdown of how much each community college in the state gets of that $896 million. So again, this is part of our budget, but it's not. Or it's not part of our budget, but it really is part of our trusted fund, or at least the funds that we're responsible for. I'll also like to point out that the budget includes separately appropriated funding for the state-mandated 2% salary increase for all employees. In the last session, the legislature authorized a 1% increase in the first year of the biennium and a 2% for all employees in the second year of the biennium. That is actually budgeted or allocated in a separate cost center, not ours. However, that amount is budgeted as a source of revenue for us so that we can include it in the salaries that we've budgeted for next year. A couple other things that I'd like to mention is in this budget, we have $16 million in Texas grants that are donations from TG, the Texas Guarantee Corporation. The TG made a $30 million donation for the biennium to the coordinating board. We spent about $15 in the first year, and we have $16 million budgeted in here for the second year of the biennium. That's, so 16 out of the $30 million. This budget also includes $3 million, again, another donation from TG for what they call the T-STEM program. They actually donated $19 million. We spent $3 up to this point. We are planning to spend $3 more next year, and so that leaves us about $13 to spend in future years. And so I think it's appropriate for me to mention and express our appreciation, as I did last year, to TG for those very generous donations. The other one, and it's not included in here because we normally do not include money even though we've been told that we're going to get it until we get it in writing. And so we didn't get the letter until after we had finalized the budget and printed it and sent it out to the board members. And in fact, I believe it was, like about a week after we did that, we got a letter. The legislature last year authorized a program through Senate Bill 620, which establishes a loan repayment program assistant for certain speech and language pathologists and audiologists to alleviate some of the acute shortages throughout the state. They authorized the program, but they didn't put any funds in it. They said, you go out and raise the funds. Lisa working with the association, the Texas Speech Language Hearing Association, was able to secure a $300,000 donation commitment from the association with promises to try to raise more money. Again, we would have included it, and it's going to be available in May of next year. We would have included this in the budget, but we did not know about it, or we didn't have the letter to make it a firm commitment. So it's not included in there. We will come in with a budget amendment and obviously make it available, include it in the budget, and make it available to those students that qualify, or to those people that qualify for that loan repayment. But I would publicly like to thank the Texas Speech and Language Hearing Association for their commitment and for raising those funds, and Lisa, for your hard work in securing those funds for the agency and for this program. Mr. Chairman and members, that concludes my budget presentation. I have staff here, and of course I will be glad to respond to any questions that you may have on any part of the budget.
Thank you, Dr. Alonso. Questions? Harold?
Arturo, the TG funds, what line item are they?
The $16 million will be in on page 3 of 15.
Okay.
That would be on B 1.1, which is the Texas grants.
Okay.
There is another one where it breaks it out by method of funding. If you go to page 7 of 15, no, that's operations. I thought we had a method of finance, but it's included in that Texas grants amount there, Harold.
Okay, and I want to go back to the college access challenge grant.
Yes.
You said we were no longer eligible for those federal funds. Were there benchmarks that we, as a state, did not meet, or
that's
what?
right? The maintenance of effort for this particular federal program requires that states meet two benchmarks, if you will. Excuse me. One of them is the support by the state for the public institutions of higher education. There has to be the amount that the state provides for institutions of higher education has to meet or exceed a 5-year rolling average of the previous 5 years. For the public institutions, we have no problem. We meet that, and we continue to meet that. But the second part is that the state continues to fund scholarships, if you will. In this case, it's the Texas TEG, as it's called, for students attending private schools. And in the last biennium, 12-13, they cut that amount significantly. And so it brought our average way down, and it just did not. And you have to meet both. It's not one or the other. It has to be both. So because of the dramatic.
So what in essence happened is the legislature cut the funding, and by virtue of that, we lost another $50 million?
$12 million.
12,
about 12 and a half per year.
So the 50 is the total?
Yes.
Okay.
Including carryover, yes. So that's correct. It's because of the cutbacks in the TEG allocation.
Other questions?
Arturo, is there anything in this budget that you see that would contrast significantly from last year's budget? Are we seeing, where are you seeing overall any major differences?
There really isn't,
Didn't see any.
Dr. Golden. It's pretty much the same.
That's what
some of the programs, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the financials, have funding for the first year, first year of the biennium with carryover provisions. Obviously, we have to estimate those amounts that will be carried over. When we do the budget in February and March, it takes a little bit more estimating. When we do it in June or July for the late adoption, we get a little bit closer. But that's the only difference. There really are not that many differences from last year, from current year.
I'm sorry. Is there any particular areas where funding was cut that you would be most concerned about?
Well, we've already discussed that federal program because that was actually funded some very good programs, not to.
But we don't really have any control over that.
No, because of the appropriations by the legislature.
Thank you.
Pastor.
Excuse me, if I may, since you have asked that question, I stated this last time, and I think it bears repeating because I am worried about it. This represents, this budget here before you represents the 5th year in a row that the agency has not received any capital funds for equipment IT replacement. We are worried about that. Since you asked, are we worried about anything? We are worried about that. Our equipment is getting old.
Well, we should be worried about that.
Is getting.
What can we do to rectify that? Is there anything that we could be doing?
Well,
we need a deferred maintenance program where we can know what computers and what IT stuff has been. Or do we have any type of inventory in terms of what's here? And is that inventory updated and things taken offline?
Yes.
Do we add things? And do we age them and where we can anticipate when they're going to wear out?
Yes.
And where are those needs the greatest, and how are we going to fund those in the future?
Exactly, and we have, in fact, we have a very good inventory system. We know the aging and when those computers become obsolete and so forth. And to the credit, the staff has done a good job of trying to manage that. We, look wherever we can. We cannibalize. We buy when we can. But there's a lot of severe limitations on what we can do. The biggest step that we can take to remedy that is to ask the legislature for money in the upcoming LAR for the next biennium. There's not much more than.
I'm sorry, we haven't received any money in 5 years. That's what I heard you say.
We have not had an appropriation for capital IT capital replacement for. I believe
if you got
4 years. Okay, I'm sorry.
You got file servers sitting all over this place that could be 5 or 6 years, 7 years old. I'm just asking, so that could go down, and we could really cripple our operations.
Yeah, actually, I think the file servers are in the data center, so those don't belong to us. They belong to but so we're talking about agency computers and so forth.
But still, we still got a problem. I mean,
we think it's beginning. If we do not get an appropriation for next biennium, the problem will only get worse.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand. At what point do you truly push the panic button, and how does something happen? I mean,
that's what I'm
looking for a path that says when this occurs, then this is what you do, and it seems like we're getting perilously close to that point. And so, what would be the course of action to move that forward?
So, would you like to comment on that? I think some of us may have already pressed that panic button. Not yet, but dangerously close to taking the matches out anyway.
I'd be more than happy to discuss this issue. History on this: back in the 12-13 biennium, we had a capital budget of $193,000. That was historically the amount that we had in there for replacement of equipment or upgrades and so on. The legislature, you remember what things were like back then, zeroed out our entire capital budget. When the next biennium rolled around, what we tried to do, again, they requested that the agency hold the line, level funding. So how we attempted to deal with it was through an exception item. We submitted an exception item for $1.1 million of various IT-related equipment purchases, including PCs, including video conferencing, and redesigning our website, things like that. None of that was approved. So I think what we need to do in reality, and obviously it'll be up to the executives, is reinstate that capital budget. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting us from a legislature point of view of reinstating that capital budget now. The problem is if we assume level funding again at the next biennium, that money will have to come from within the agency somewhere. So that's the dilemma. Because I don't think the way to deal with it is through exception items. I mean, it should be part of the standard budget. I think it'd be hard-pressed to find another organization in North America that would have an IT capital budget of 0 for 4 consecutive years. I mean, you simply can't do business that way.
Pastor.
So there are a couple of thoughts. One would be that since we have this IT-related budget that is we are putting into as part of the capital budget, what happens if we turn it into expense and lease? Because these things go obsolete every year.
Yeah, we've looked at those options, by the way. Our technical team did an analysis of leasing, or the other thing we've looked at is virtual desktops.
Right.
And none of those options really would save money. The only benefit to that, it would come out of operational funds as opposed to capital funds. But the same dilemma, we don't have the funds available within the agency. But we have been trying to look at options like that. What we've been doing somewhat is where we have funds available in operational budgets, for example, if you have salary vacancies, using some of that money to buy a limited number of PCs. But there's kind of a catch-22 on that as well, since the legislature only allows you to use operational funds up to a cap of $100,000 in the biennium. Mm-hmm. So even if we have operational funds available, we can't use them beyond $100,000.
So we are trapped from both sides.
Exactly.
I mean, we need a strategic plan in terms of how we can address this issue. And I don't mean, Otero, I mean, we're going to approach at some point a crisis situation where we could really have some problems in operating the internal to the day-to-day operations of this agency. We don't keep our IT infrastructure up to date.
That's correct. And we have, as I mentioned a while ago, we have started working on the LAR. We're at least discussing the aspects of the LAR, and that has been at the top of our discussions, that we do need to go in with a strategic plan on what we are going to do for the next biennium.
So are other agencies dealing with this in the same predicament that we're in? I mean, is this germane to
I think
other
agencies have dealt with it internally with their existing base funds. And I know Dr. Alonso did some research into what other agencies had in their capital IT budgets, and most of them have a fair amount in there.
Well, why are they leaving? Is there any particular? You're telling me that most of the state agencies have a line item appropriations for IT?
Yes.
And we're just being left out?
It seems so.
And the real concern is the catch-up on this is going to be substantial.
Yeah, this problem's going to just compound itself year after year. The longer we delay addressing it, the bigger it's going to become.
Exactly. We had been on a 4-year refresh cycle, so you'd replace 1/4 of your PCs every year, so you're not having to buy 200 PCs in one shot. And of course, like you say, now we're in kind of a catch-up situation, so it's going to cost more to catch up.
Yeah, and some of this software as new versions come out, your computer is not big enough to support the upgrades.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
And as we all know with our home computers, over time they kind of get cluttered up and start to slow down, and you really have to replace desktop PCs. Typically you're looking at 4 to 5 year maximum cycle. Laptops, it's much shorter, 2 years, 3 years maybe. And we have around 100 laptops now in the agency. A lot of people have gone to laptops and docking stations because they travel or take them home at night. So laptops are more expensive and also a shorter refresh cycle.
Any other questions, comments?
So I want to go back talking about the budget for a second, Dr. Alonso. Do we have any input, insight, or influence in the pass-through dollars? Or they just decided by completely without any of our insight and then just asked us to take these funds and deliver to the next agency?
Yeah, most of them are allocated for a specific purpose.
So we have no influence, no insight, no input?
On the trustee funds?
Yes.
Very, very little. We do manage it. We have to develop rules. We have to make sure that they are used correctly. But as far as, which we can't just use them for whatever we want to. Yeah, right.
So if a college or a agency requires more funds, then they go and play their own part in front of the legislature?
The institutions submit their own legislative appropriations requests. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
You know, this kind of is a catch-22 because the more money we go after, like we lost this $12 million
Federal grant.
federal dollars, and the more federal dollars that we acquire, of course, that's more dollars for Texas. But of course, we would generally assume that would be good for our students in Texas. But the more money that we're managing, our overhead's increasing as an agency. We're having to hire more people. We're having to have more computers. We're having to have more software, more hardware. Is that I mean, one's linked to the other. I mean,
it has to be managed, Dr. Golden. The most federal dollars come with.
Is there money with those federal dollars for us
what they call indirect
administrative
costs.
money
Right.
that we could use to administer the funds?
Yeah, some of them have very little. Some have a cap, percentage-wise. There are some. I don't know if we have any in the agency, but I have seen federal funds that have no administrative money at all. But most of them do allow.
Enough to cover our
I don't know about
overhead?
enough, but at least some offset the administrative costs. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, may I have a motion for approving the FY
I'm so
2015? Motion. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 5, auditing. Agenda item 5A is an update on internal audit reports and activities. This is a reporting item only, does not require any committee action. Mark Pell will present this item. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm glad you took that down. We didn't want to call you Susan.
I wanted no confusion. Agenda item 5A is informational item to bring you all up to date on the internal audit reports and activities since our last update in January. We completed 2 internal audit reports during the period, and we closed out 1 complaint. So first in your packet, you'll see a final report for the audit of TRIP administration. This audit resulted in 2 reportable conditions, and thereby we have a report rating system, and we gave this a Category 2 rating, meaning that the reported observations warrant management attention, but if addressed timely, do not pose a significant risk to the agency. So as far as those 2 recommendations in the TRIP audit, one recommendation was to expand the written procedures in the program area to more fully address the appeals process. And the other recommendation was to strengthen information systems access controls over the master spreadsheet that contains all of the TRIP financial information going back to the inception of the program. Management agreed with our recommendations and has addressed one and is in the process of implementing the other recommendation. The complaint that was closed during the period was closed due to a lack of information to further investigate it. And there's a memo in your packet for this particular complaint. It pertained to an allegation that an online loan access had been fraudulently created. And we searched through our records to look for a name match based on the complainant, and we were unable to establish a name match. And so we, in a situation like that, we attempt to reach out to the complainant if we have contact information to try to clarify the complaint or obtain additional identifying information. And in this case, we were unable to reach the complainant, so we closed that matter. And this complaint, as many complaints, it comes through the state auditor's office, and so when we close the complaint, that memo is also submitted to the state auditor's office so that we can close the loop with those stakeholders. There are 2 projects related to the Be On Time loan program. There's one project, and I would ask Sharon if she wouldn't mind passing out a copy of the of the final report for this project. This particular project that was finalized during the period related to the eligibility aspects of the Be On Time loan program administration. This was an audit that was on our audit plan for the year. Just like the previous audit, this audit resulted in a Category 2 rating. It contained 2 recommendations. First, a recommendation was made to update the signature authorization forms from institutions of higher education to ensure that within the agency, our own review process is based on current signature authority from the institutions. We noted for 6 of the 30 authorization forms that we looked at, there were not current authorization forms on file. So that was one of the 2 issues. Secondly, there was a procedural recommendation to strengthen oversight and review of forgiveness transactions to ensure that all required documentation is in the file to support the forgiveness decision, and also to give a second look at ensuring that there's no one individual within the coordinating board that is able to execute the entire forgiveness transaction process. So it's kind of a quality assurance measure to ensure that there's adequate oversight over these forgiveness transactions. Management response indicate that both recommendations are to be implemented by April 30th. Lastly, there's a second audit project that's related to the Be On Time loan program. This is an inquiry into the Be On Time loan funding. This project is substantially completed, and a final report is anticipated on or before May the 5th. That concludes my update on internal audit reports and activities, and I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mark. One thing I would like to note related to his final audit, we will have a special called meeting of the Agency Operations Committee on May 12th at 9 a.m., where Mark will have his completed internal audit report. We'll have management response at that time. At this point, that's going to be the only item on the agenda for that day. So I'd ask the committee members to try to, I realize it's short notice, but ask you to try to accommodate that meeting if at all possible. Any questions for Mark? Okay, item number 6, compliance. Agenda item 6A is update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This is a reporting item only, does not require committee action. Mark?
Thank you. This is an informational item where we update you on compliance monitoring and reports and activities since our prior meeting in January. Since the prior meeting, we completed 2 projects during the reporting period. Both of those final reports are included in your materials. These were both community college audits, formula funding. The first one was Tarrant County Community College Northeast, and the second was Lone Star College System Cy-Fair campus. Both of those projects resulted in no reportable observations. In terms of our other activities in compliance monitoring, we have our work scheduled for the remainder of the year, and we are on track to meet our compliance monitoring annual plan. And I'm presently interviewing to fill a vacancy so that we can be fully staffed with 4 compliance specialists to help us achieve the accomplishment of that plan. We're working on next year's compliance monitoring plan that will be brought to you at the July meeting for your review, consideration, and requesting your approval. We continue to work on piloting a desk review methodology. Right now we're conducting performance audits, which are full-blown site visits and fairly labor-intensive approach. The desk review methodology will give us another tool in the toolkit to be able to achieve a level of coverage at other institutions that is less resource intensive. It gives us a view of what's going on at that institution and it can serve to inform our risk process so that if we conducted a desk review, for example, and we note some information that doesn't appear accurate or questionable, we can then either choose to extend at that time and turn that project into a full-blown audit, or we could hang on to that information and feed it into our planning process for the subsequent year so that the next time we go out there, we can conduct a full-blown audit. So we're looking forward to having a second methodology. Once that methodology has been piloted for the remainder of this year, we will actually, as required by statute, we will be reconvening in a negotiated rulemaking setting to obtain consensus as to the use of that methodology in our compliance monitoring approach. That was a requirement of Senate Bill 215 to go through negotiated rulemaking. That concludes my compliance monitoring report. I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions for Mark? Okay, this concludes the Agency Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a motion and a second? All those in favor say aye. Meeting is adjourned.